Hello, everyone. My name is Sarah Ward. I'm a speech and language pathologist, and I'm co-director of Cognitive Connections, which is a private practice in Concord, Massachusetts. And I would love to introduce you to my co-director, Kristen Jacobson. Kristen and I have been working together for, I think almost 26 years. She's an unbelievable clinician and a great person to know, and she is the co-author of our 360 Thinking Executive Function program, which I'm going to be sharing with you today. And our number one goal today is how do we support students in developing more independent executive function skills? Before we get started, I'd love to share with you a few slides and pictures from experiences that I've had in the classroom. So I was in one class and I was observing a little boy. It was the fourth grade. And at the start of the fourth transition, the expectation was you would have out your black social studies folder like you see right here. But the boy that I was observing, this is what his desk looked like at the start of the fourth transition. So what you can see is he does have his black social studies folder out, but he'd made this math cube and he hadn't gotten away to throwing around out all of the trash. So there's still all the trash that's on the table. This is his personal reading book. That's the social studies book. This is his language arts folder, and that's the to-do list from the speech pathologist. And every time this class went to transition, he couldn't put away the old things, and so the new things accumulated, and he had a really difficult time managing the materials. And in fact, the teacher said to me, she goes, well, normally we have 4 students per table. She said, our solution has been to give him his own table. I'm like, this is actually not a solution. And then I was in another classroom where this is what your desk was supposed to look like. They were a little bit funky desks. They were tall on one side and short on the other. But the student that I was observing, this is what her desk space looked like. Have you seen desks like this? They're a complete black hole. Look at all that stuff in the desk. And you can tell, there's the notebook, there's the textbook, the water bottle, the glue stick, and the pencil. And this teacher said to me, she said, I'm so frustrated. She said, this is not a student who needs a new pencil every day. She said, they need a new pencil every single time we transition from subject to subject. And in fact, the teacher said, I'm so frustrated because is it really my responsibility to provide her with a pencil every single time she switches subjects? How come she can't organize herself to hold on to a pencil? These are complaints we hear often all the time. And then I had one mom say to me, well, can you do anything about that? I'm like, oh boy, yeah, that's pretty messy. And then I have a boy who is a junior in high school, and he came to see me and I said, do you need any help? He goes, oh yes, I have a biology final on Friday. I said, all right, well, did your teacher give you a study guide? He goes, yes, just a minute. And this is what he pulled out of his backpack. And it was so heartbreaking. I mean, look at this disaster. But he would pull out paper after paper and then he would look at it and he'd go, oh man, if I turned that in, I could have gotten credit for it. So he had more work that he'd done. He'd just never gotten around to turning it in. And so we hear this all the time, that students really have trouble sort of managing those papers, turning in the work, and sort of getting themselves organized in space and across time. So I also want to share with you another important picture. Oh, of course, there's this one. I did take a picture of the trash can when he left my office because this was the Christmas cookie and the holiday gift card that he'd been carrying around since December. Remember, it was May and we were studying for finals. It's like, oh, cringeworthy. Do you ever see students who have this, kind of the messy sandwich in the bottom of the backpack? Yeah, we want to make sure that we can address that too. So this one is interesting though. In this classroom, the teacher gave the students 40 minutes to generate 3 paragraphs of output. And on the left is a neurotypical student. You can see 3 paragraphs. On the right, this student couldn't quite get 3 paragraphs, but it's still the same volume of output. But the student that I was observing that had some executive function challenges, this is their output in the same 40 minutes. And you can see it's very limited. We did get a pretty cool bubble title up there. But writing is the ultimate executive function skill, and it's so challenging for students. And so I often think, well, what is this skill that impacts your ability to be organized, to sort of transition through routines, to gather your materials, to organize your materials, remember to turn your homework in, and of course to even write a paper. And then I had to put this one in too, when you tell the child to hurry in the morning. Have any of you ever felt like that, where it's like, oh my gosh, this is taking hours for this student to do this as they're trying to transition from, say, the cubby to the desk space, or maybe even you're a parent in the morning and you think, come on, we got to get dressed, we're out the door. And they just don't change their pace. I love this picture. It's like, there he goes, he's finally moving. All right, so how do we address executive function skills? What I would like to do is I want to first introduce you to our 360 Thinking Executive Function Program. But before we do that, in your handout, you will see that you have this as a cover page. I'd like to make sure you take that out. If you don't have a printed handout, just take a piece of paper and make a quick 3x3 grid on it, because I'm going to have you use this for taking a little bit of notes to understand the key concepts associated with task execution. So we've developed something called the 360 Thinking Executive Function Curriculum. It's in almost over 1,600 schools in the United States, Canada, Europe, Australia, even as far as Africa, which is pretty cool. And what we're going to be doing is sharing with you the underlying principles of how do students develop this skill called task execution, and then we'll give you a couple of practical strategies to really help you support your students in being as independent as possible. So to do this, the best way to do this is to actually start in the classroom. So here you can see that we've got a group of kids and they're on the rug. And what happens is that in the beginning of the year, when students go back to school in August, September, teachers always establish the routine. And the purpose of establishing the routine is that students know what to predict and have a sense of what's coming up and what they're going to be doing next. And this classroom, clearly they have the routine in place that they always have morning meeting. And what we're going to do is we're going to focus on the little girl right here in the blue sweater. She has fantastic executive function skills. She knows the routine. She knows that every morning they have rug time and they go over a little math activity, the number of days of school left in the year. They might talk about the weather. But then what she does is she begins to pull up in her thought bubble, all right, well, I know it's about 9 o'clock, which means we're going to transition to writing. And she knows that in Writer's Workshop, especially on Mondays, they always write in their journals something interesting that they did over the weekend or something that they're thinking about. It's just a free write opportunity. And notice she's picturing the time and she's picturing that journal page, and she really knows the teacher's only expecting, a page or so, and we have about a half hour to do that. And so she starts to think to herself, well, what could I write about? Well, I did go over to a birthday party and that was really fun. I'm going to write about that. And with all of that in mind, she starts to talk herself through this. All right, well, I'll write about the birthday party. It was so fun. All right. And she's picturing, I know the teacher's going to expect an intro sentence and a few details, and the teacher's going to want expensive adjectives. And so notice too, especially if you are a speech and language pathologist, she clearly has what we call the schema of birthday party. She knows you write about whose party it was, where you went, the things that you did, how she hit the piñata, and how her friend got a backpack and she wants one just like it. She knows all those features of birthday party. And she's pre-imagined this in her mind so that the minute the teacher says, okay, class, it's Monday morning, time for Writer's Workshop, let's go back to our desks, she gets up, she grabs her Writer's Workshop notebook, she transitions, she sits down, she's aware of the time, and she immediately initiates and does the work. And that's fantastic. And those are not the kids that are referred to me. The kids that I work with are struggling much more with this whole task execution and being able to initiate and transition. And they look a little bit more like Jackson here. Notice he shows up to the rug and he still has his coat on. He hasn't quite made that transition from the cubby to the rug. He's kind of got one foot in the group, one foot out of the group. He's found something interesting on the bookshelf. And as rug time comes to a close, the teacher makes the announcement. All right, class, remember it's Monday morning, time for us to do Writer's Workshop. Let's go back to our desks and write about what we did over the weekend. And she dismisses the group. Now notice the whole group is going to leave, but students like Jackson here with weaker executive function skills, they tend to be highly prompt dependent. These are the students that you have to say, okay, go get your writer's notebook. Okay, go get your pencil. All right, you need to sit down. And we often describe these kids as being a beat, if not 22 beats behind. It's not that they're just always late, but it's just a little bit of a beat behind, and they require an awful lot of kind of cueing and coaching to be in the right place with the things that they need. But then look what happens. By the time he sits down, notice he doesn't initiate and has really no awareness of the passage of time. So the thing is, whether you're a teacher or a special educator, when we have a student who doesn't initiate, we tend to approach them and ask them questions. We might say things like, well, Jackson, what did you do this weekend? I know you play on a soccer team. Did you play soccer? He does says no. Well, did you just kick a ball around in the front yard? Did you ride a bike with your brother? I know you like to fish. Did you go fishing? And the thing is, we keep asking him questions, but the only thing that he says out loud or even in his own mind is, "Oh, I don't remember what I did this weekend. I don't like writing. I can't stand writing. I don't know what I'm going to write about." Oh, great. Look, she's a good writer. And doesn't really initiate the task. And then what will happen is we keep asking him questions. So we might even say things, well, you can even just write about the weather, how nice it is. Finally we have some nice sunshine. Or you could even talk about what you want to do this summer. It's just an opportunity to write. You can write about anything. But the reason we keep doing that is we're trying really, really hard to get him to see something in that mental thought bubble or in his mind's eye of what it is that he could write about. So the thing about it is these two kids are critical examples of executive function or executive dysfunction because they are demonstrating the presence and or the absence of the two key underlying factors associated with executive control. So the first underlying factor is that you have to have working memory for strong executive function skills. But with respect to working memory, we have two kinds of working memory. And executive function always begins with nonverbal working memory. And nonverbal working memory is that mental thought bubble of what something is going to look like. It's that imagination, and that girl saw it. Remember, she saw the party, she saw the time, she's visualizing. The reason you need nonverbal working memory is that it drives something called conditional reasoning. Now, conditional reasoning is that if-then skill that you see up there. It's if I'm going to write about the birthday party, then these are the details that I'll include. If the teacher wants expensive adjectives, then I'll use this word. Now, notice that conditional reasoning drives the second type of working memory, which is called verbal working memory. But what's most important on your handout and to circle here is that the verbal working memory is absolutely in the form of something called self-talk, or even more importantly in the field of research right now, it's something in the form of called a stated implementation intention. You literally state your intent of how you plan to implement a task. I am going to write about the birthday party. I should include details about where we went. I'll talk about how I hit. Oh, no. I have to use expensive adjectives. I should probably use the word slammed. I slammed the piñata. And so with all of that in mind, she's able to initiate. But if we contrast it with Jackson, notice he didn't start with any mental imagination or thought bubble. And as a result, he doesn't have any if-then thinking. There's not that ability to stop and say, well, if I do this, then that will happen. Or if I include this, then I could write about that. And in fact, you might see this. I find most of the time when kids are referred to me at a younger age, it's because they are impulsive. They're not stopping to say, well, gee, if I do this, then that will happen. They're not thinking and visualizing it. Interesting, Jackson does have verbal working memory. Oh, I don't know what I'm going to write about. I can't stand writing. I'm not even a good writer. I don't like it. But the problem is, in contrast to the other little girl, is that he absolutely does not have self-talk. His verbal working memory, in fact, is a little bit more of like a negative, kind of pessimistic inner critic kind of language, which we worry about. I don't know if you see the same thing in your students, just a little bit more of negativity. So the first thing that I want you to do then in terms of key concepts is to know that executive function always begins with nonverbal working memory. And it's what allows you to visually hold an idea in mind so that as you're picturing that, you can say, okay, well, if that's what it's going to look like and that's what I'm working towards, then I can resist distractions. I can begin to sort of not give up because I have a sense of what it is that I'm moving towards. But even more important is that nonverbal working memory develops the emergence of that if-then planning skill, that cause and effect. If I need to include those details, then this is what I'm going to write about. So on your grid here, let's go ahead and write down the first key concept. Executive function always starts with nonverbal working memory, which then drives our if-then thinking, which then drives self-directed talk. The next key thing then is, remember I said these kids were demonstrating the presence and or the absence of two key things. And as you're writing this down, I'll sort of talk about this for just a second. I don't know if you know this, but executive function has no correlation to IQ. In fact, 90 to 95% of the time, we can identify a student having executive function challenges and we refer them out for an assessment. And more often than not, they come back with average, if not significantly above average intelligence. And sometimes they don't even qualify for services because their scores are just simply too high. So if it has no correlation to IQ, then it certainly would be helpful to know, well, what does executive function have a correlation to? And we know that executive function has 100% correlation to SQ. Now, some of you might be saying, okay, I know what IQ is, I know EQ is emotional intelligence, but SQ? Well, SQ is situational intelligence, and situational intelligence is your ability at any one moment in time to be situationally aware, to be able to essentially stop and read the room and understand the features of the space, what's happening in a moment in time, the objects and materials that are required of you, and to know what your role and what are the role of other individuals in the room. So we've put that into the acronym of STOP because we often teach students to stop and read the room to be situationally aware. When we read the space of a room, we often read the room from the wide angle to the narrow angle, so that when we walk in, we sort of broadly take a look and organizationally size up the zones or how the space is organized. As we navigate a space, we're often aware of time. What time is it now? What's coming up? When do I need to transition? How much time do I have? We read the room for objects, both organizationally, where can materials be found, but also what objects are out, or how do I know what tools or objects are required of me? And then we really read the room for people in terms of, I might come into a room and see a friend. Oh, hey, there you are, friend. I want to come sit by you. But important on your handout is we read the room for role. In other words, what's my job right now? What are other people doing and what is their jobs? And how do I sort of take my position in the classroom to do my job, essentially? So every single time we enter a room, we say, where am I? What time is it? What objects do I need? And what's my job right now? Let me give you a really good example of this. Imagine that you had a student in your office and you were going to transition them back to the library to join their classroom. So what happens is, if it's a student who has really strong situational intelligence, this is what it might look like. They walk in the room and they read the space. Okay, I'm in the library, and then they read the room for zones. Oh, there's the fact book zone, right? There's the easy reader book zone, and then that's the librarian zone, and then that's the student zone where the students are seated on the rug. Then they're aware of time. And by the way, time doesn't always have to be like 11 a.m., 12 o'clock, 9:30. It's more this sense of what's happening in this moment in time. So in this moment in time, we're getting a lesson about the earth and then objects. Well, the librarian has the globe. And guess what? It's equally as important to read my peers to see that they do not have any objects as it is to see that they do have objects. So when I read this room, I notice, okay, I don't need to go gather anything because my friends don't have anything. And so then what happens is I read the room for role. Well, the librarian is being the teacher and the students are seated on the rug being listeners. So if my friends are seated on the rug being listeners, then I know I need to sit down and join the group. But look what happens if you have a student who has weaker executive function skills. They might walk in and go, oh, those books are boring. Seriously, nobody likes those books. And then they might say, oh no, I forgot my library book to return. And they say to the teacher, I'll be right back. I'm just going to go get my library book. And they turn around to leave. And you go, no. No one has their library books. We're going to do that later. Please take a seat on the rug. And this student goes, oh, I don't want to sit on the rug. That's the rug with the black spot. It's gross. I'm not going to sit there. And the teacher goes, that's fine. You can sit on the other side. And all of a sudden this boy goes, hey, I know where Madagascar is. And he walks right through the group and he starts to touch the globe. And the teacher says, please sit down. And all of a sudden the student goes, oh no, the glare in the window is really bad. I'll just go close the curtain. The teacher says, you don't need to worry about it. Please just take a seat on the rug. And all of a sudden he says to the girl in the white sweater, that's my space. I don't want to sit where the black spot is. It's gross. You need to move. Do any of you know this student? Because all of a sudden this student is dysregulated and you're going to be dependent upon, a student's going to be dependent upon you to regulate them and to get them kind of settled in. So they're very prompt dependent. But the challenge is, look what happens when you mature through the grades, because when you're in the younger grades, the teacher will regulate you. But by the time you get to the upper grades, it really shifts to having to have a lot of self-regulation. So let's take a look at what it looks like if you have strong executive function skills as a high schooler. Now you walk in the room and you read the room. Space, I'm in the science room. In this moment in time, the teacher is checking off homework. Objects, kids have out their homework notebook. Job, they're being homework managers. But imagine what happens if you're a student who walks into a room and you have a lot of trouble reading the room. Now, all of a sudden, you walk in and you're like, oh, cool, I saw that in Harry Potter. Hey, are we finally using those chemicals today? Oh, it's about time. How random. The chemicals are the same color as everyone's shirt. Oh, I hate those goggles. They make your eyes sweat. Did you know that? It's true. Eyes can sweat. And all of a sudden what happens is I sit down and I'm starting to talk to my neighbor about sweaty eyes. But the problem is that when I sit down, I now don't take out my homework. And this is the student who gets home and mom says, honey, this morning we put your homework in your backpack. Why didn't you turn it in? And this is the kid who's going to say, well, mom, the teacher didn't ask for it. Why are you freaking out? Well, guess what? The teacher doesn't always have to ask for it. You need to be able to stop and read the room. So the thing is that this ability to sort of read the room is beyond just sort of that navigation of space. I want to take a look and have you see this picture. We use this photograph in every single informal evaluation that we do. And we will say to younger and older students alike, here's a photograph of a space. Could you tell me how this space is organized? And it cracks me up because it's always the same. Individuals and students with strong executive function skills, they will often say, oh, okay, well, it's in the grocery store in the produce or the vegetable section. And they will tell me that these are the lettuces and those are the peppers. And again, depending upon a child's vocabulary, my younger students might say that these are small and those are big peppers. Students with more advanced vocabulary might say that these are the hot and those are the sweet or the bell peppers. And if I were to ask you, how are the bell peppers organized? You would likely say by color. We have yellow, orange, red, and green. Now, it never fails when I show this photograph to individuals with weaker executive function skills, and I say, tell me about the organization of this space. They look for a second and they immediately say, well, a red one fell out. And they point to this one. And then they look and they say, and that one fell out too. And I'm sure a few of you are going, oh no, I noticed the red pepper. That's okay, because my guess is that even if you saw the red pepper, you knew the task was to look at it in an organized way, so you were able to quickly ignore it and then go right back to the bigger picture and task at hand. But we find there are a lot of students with weak executive skills that they get so caught up in that detail or by that random point of focus that they have a hard time shifting to that bigger picture of essentially kind of reading the room. Now, there was a fascinating functional MRI study done where they looked at students' ability to read a space. And this is what it looked like in a neurotypical brain. And it doesn't really matter whether you can read an MRI or not. But what's important about it is that it went from the visual cortex to the motor cortex, which makes a lot of sense because the idea is that I stopped and I read the room and then I acted on what it was that I saw. Now, they did the exact same thing in individuals with high functioning autism. And I want you to see what happened there. This is what it looked like. That is jaw-dropping. It's not that those students weren't paying attention. They were paying attention to everything. These were the students that walk into your room and they notice the fluff on the floor and the smudge on the whiteboard and that your earring is falling out and someone has a cool pair of tennis shoe ties. They are just sort of drawn to random little details and they have a harder time sort of integrating the gestalt of the room and acting on that gestalt imagery. So the key thing then is that situational intelligence is another very early aspect of executive function skills because it allows you to enter a space, stop, and read the space essentially by zones. Where am I? What time is it? What objects do I need and what's happening right now? And the thing is that it's self-directed because the student is answering the question. Well, if this is what's happening now based upon my observation, what do I need to do? What matters now? And notice that generates that if-then thinking. If this is what it looks like, then that's what I need to do. So the second key thing that we need to talk about is that we need to talk about situational intelligence, except I had to throw this in here. Oh my gosh, what's happening now that we're in a remote classroom? Now the students, this is the classroom that they're reading, and they may not have the ability to utilize their peers and the physical space to guide their actions. So we need to make sure that we're addressing that as well. So with all of that in mind, our second key concept then is that executive function is also driven by situational intelligence, and that is that stop skill. You have to be able to read the space, the time, the objects, and the people of the given situation. As you're writing that down, what I'd like you to do is also put a plus sign there and an equal sign right there. Because even though these are isolated cognitive skills, I can measure your ability to stop and read the room. I can measure your nonverbal working memory and your verbal working memory. The fact of the matter is they almost occur simultaneously. We enter a space, we stop and read the room, and we envision what it is that we need to look like. When you combine those two skills together, and so here's the example. This girl is situationally aware of where is she, what time is it, what's happening in this moment in time, and what's coming up, and she pulls that into her nonverbal working memory. The combination of those two cognitive skills actually becomes a processing ability, but it has a very specific name. It is called mimetic ideational information processing. And holy moly, that's a mouthful. So don't worry about it. We basically say that you mime the idea in your head, and we teach all of our students that their job when they're looking at being planning and organized as a person is to be a mind mime. And I'll ask students I work with, do you know what a mime is? Have you ever seen a mime? And it's so funny, they all do the same thing. They're like, oh yeah, that's the dude that does this. And they show me like climbing up a wall or opening a door or pulling a rope. And I say, that's exactly right. So they're acting on something, even though that object isn't physically in front of them. In other words, they're sort of trying it out. So this is what we call a mental trial and error simulation. Mimetic processing is at the core of strong executive function skills. And all of you are doing it right now as you're listening to me. So hopefully you're listening to me. But what happens is you have a little movie going through your head. And I don't know, maybe it's summertime, whatever it is, but the movie in your head says, oh, okay, I'm going to finish listening to this webinar. Then I've quickly got to go into the laundry room. I need to put the wash into the dryer. And then, bless the dog's heart, she's crossing her legs. I've got to take the dog for a walk. And then I've got to get back and I need to prepare a few things because we're going to the beach this afternoon. And in thinking about that, you might all of a sudden go, oh my gosh, actually, if I take the dog on a long walk and get back, that's not going to give me enough time to manage everything in the dryer and make the lunches and pack up. So I better just take the dog for a quick walk. And when we get back, I'll take her for a nice long walk this afternoon. And so what happens is all of a sudden, you're mentally pre-simulating how that future will play out. That's why we call it a mental dress rehearsal. But the coolest thing is it's essentially mental trial and error with no risk of error, because you can try it out and experience and even feel the emotion of it. If you try out that plan and you think, well, actually, it is a beautiful day, and if we end up at the beach a long time, then the dog's going to be in the house a long time. So actually, I better take the dog for a long walk, and I'll ask one of my kiddos to help with the lunches, and then when I get home, I can just take her for the quick walk. Yeah, that feels much better. And what we do is we kind of play with that plan. So you can run a plan A and a plan B with no risk of error and pre-experience how those feel. To make this easy, we've put this into the acronym MIME so that we can teach students how to be a mind mime or to mime it. So the first thing that we do when we do task execution is we make an image of the future space that we are going to. So I'm watching the webinar, and then what I do is I make an image of the laundry room because I need to go put the washing from the wash into the dryer. So watch this. I pull up a picture in my mind of the laundry room. All right, laundry room. Is that planning? Well, it's interesting, but not really. The next thing that I'm going to do is I have to do something called episodic future thinking. Now, I want to take a little detour to explain to you what this is because it's so important for our executive function model. So if I were to show you a picture and say, give me a dictionary definition of wedding, you might say, oh, well, it's a celebration where two people come together to, share their love for one another and exchange vows to spend their lifetime together. And that's what a wedding is. But the thing is, that's just your factual knowledge. And the fact of the matter is, if I said to you, well, how do you know that? Most people would say, well, I just know a wedding's a wedding. Or if I say, how do you know a dog is a dog? You'd say, well, I just know a dog is a dog because, I don't know, it's a dog. The key thing is that is something called semantic memory. And semantic memory we differentiate from what we call episodic or autobiographical memory. The key thing about semantic memory is it has no context. It's not sort of spatially connected to anything. You can't go back and think of the exact time you remembered learned what a dog was or learned where a wedding was. So the thing is, we contrast semantic memory with something called episodic memory. Now, episodic memory is personal autobiographical. So if I said to you, tell me about a wedding you went to, and you said, oh my gosh, I went and it was my niece's wedding and it was so much fun. It was on the beach and it was beautiful. Her dress was so pretty, but it was really cute. She had pink flip-flops on the beach underneath the dress, and the reception was a blast. I mean, my uncle, he danced all night long. And the difference is that you're really, like you can see here, you're re-experiencing wedding. You can picture being at the reception and Uncle Joe busting a move on the dance floor, all those things, all right? So the idea is that episodic memory is personal, it's autobiographical, it's remembering where you were in the past in space and time. And the key thing is, it's the remembering system. So brand new research, although I roll my eyes when I say that because it doesn't seem like it should be brand new, tells us that we have something called episodic future thinking. So just like you had the ability to teleport yourself in the past and experience what it was like in the past moment, we now know that we have the ability to do episodic future thinking. We can envision ourselves in the future at a future space and time. So now what happens is space, I see the laundry room, and then I can envision, well, what do I look like in the laundry room? And I have my ability to picture myself there. But think about that as that planning. There's the laundry room, and I see myself in the laundry room. Well, it's interesting, but it's still not executive planning. The next one is the most important one of all. We do something called mental spatial time travel. Now, what mental spatial time travel is literally where you're envisioning how you are moving to achieve the goal. So you have to see yourself going from your desk where you're watching this into the laundry room where you're going to change things over, to the mudroom to grab the leash, taking the dog for a walk, coming back, making lunches, going down the hall to grab the towels for the beach, going out to maybe the garage to grab the beach chairs, and then packing up and putting things in the car. You literally envision yourself going from point A to point B to point C. And the thing about it is that you can actually pre-experience your physiological state doing that. If you envision, okay, I'm going to take the dog for a short walk to have a lot of time to cook everything for the lunches, oh, that feels good. But then you can imagine coming home and seeing the dog in distress and feeling that and thinking, nope, I better take the dog for a long walk so that she has a chance to relax while we're away at the beach. You can literally pre-experience the emotion of that. And collectively then, all of that together is what allows you to say, well, if I want the dog to be comfortable, then I'll take her for a long walk, and plan B, I'll ask the kids to help me out make lunches. So at the core of executive function, you have to be a mind mime. Make an image. What will it look like? See yourself in the future. What will I look like? Imagine your movement. How am I going from point A to point B to point C? And how does that feel? And by pre-imagining it, we have the ability to make adjustments as are necessary. So let me show you this next series of slides, and believe it or not, they're probably the most important of not only this presentation, but all of the future presentations that I hope you'll watch with me on time management and task planning. So imagine that you have a student who is in the kitchen, and you say to them, honey, it's 7:15, we've got to be out the door by 7:30, quick, go upstairs and finish getting ready for school. Now, a child with weak executive function skills might be like, I know, Mom. And you can say, well, honey, like I said, at 7:15, we have got to go by 7:30. We can't be late. And I can't drive you today. You have to take the bus. I have an important work meeting. Quick, go upstairs. And the kid goes, I know. And you say, well, then go. And they go, I am. And they really may or may not even change their pace. Now, what can happen is that student can get upstairs. They walk into their room. They see their cell phone. So they grab their cell phone and they send a Snapchat. I don't know why the kids do that. And then they go online and they check Instagram for just a few minutes. And then they go and they find a really cool hair scrunchie and they decide to start playing with their braiding their hair. Okay, well, is this a good time to be playing with a hair scrunchie? Is this a good time to be surfing Instagram? Probably not. And so all of a sudden, the problem in this example, the student with weaker executive skills, is now once again prompt dependent. They're not getting ready, and they're going to wait for you to come up and say, "We're running late. Come on, grab your sweatshirt, put your homework in your backpack. We've got to go right now." And they need that external regulation to keep them on task and on pace with the given time parameters. But look what happens if you have really good executive function skills. Now the same thing, mom can say, "Honey, at 7:15, we have to be out the door by 7:30. Quick, go upstairs and finish getting ready." And this student can still say, "I know," and mom says, "We'll go," and they go, "Okay." So remember, the student is downstairs, and that's very important to know. So as they're downstairs, they're walking and saying, "Okay," and they're moving through the house, and they're going to be a mind mime. So the first thing they're going to do is make an image. They pull up that image of their bedroom. Okay, I see my bedroom in my mind. Then what do I look like? They literally imagine themselves in the bedroom and see themselves. They're still downstairs, walking through the house, and then they do the M. Well, what's my movement? Well, I've got to go from my backpack over to my desk. I need to get my homework and my textbook, and I need to go to the armoire and grab a sweatshirt, and I don't want to be late because I want to hang out with my friend Emily. There's the emotion. And before that student even gets upstairs and puts one toe into their bedroom, look at that. They've already executed the entire plan in their mind. And the reason why this is the most important slide is that because this girl has pre-imagined it, then the second she walks into her room, she just carries out the plan that she's imagined. She gathers her backpack, she gets her textbook, she gets her homework, she grabs her sweatshirt, and she's out the door on time. Because here's the deal. 90% of the time, task planning happens in a different space from where you execute the plan. That's so important, I have to say it again. 90% of the time, we plan what we're going to do in one space that we're going to execute in a future space. And that's what allows us to be a beat ahead. When that little girl was on the rug, she planned what she was going to do before she even got to her desk space so that she was prepared and ready to go. So if you, for example, tell a student, "Go to bed, it's time for bed," if all a student does is goes, "Yep, I go to bed," that's not strong executive skills. Strong executive function skills, you have to engage mimetic processing. So if you're really able to do that, you don't just imagine yourself sleeping. You say, "Okay, well, that means I need to pack up my bag. I need to set my alarm. I need to brush my teeth. I need to wash my face." I actually really love this slide because I think, that totally represents exactly what mimetic processing is. It's that ability to pre-imagine how you're moving through space and time to get the job done. And in this case, the job is that evening routine of being ready for bed. So the key thing that we're going to put here then is the next concept is the mental dress rehearsal, or being a mind mime. And so remember, nonverbal working memory and being situationally aware. We stop and read a room, we pull up an image, and when you do that at the same time, you are doing mimetic processing. But that's only one part of it, because if we go back to this example, when you're in elementary school, one of the ways that you're navigating the classroom is specifically in the contained room itself. So as she's sitting there on the rug, this girl has the ability to say, "Oh, okay, I'm going to go over to the cubby area and I'm going to get my writer's notebook, and then I'm going to go back to my desk where my pencil is." But look what happens when all of a sudden you're in high school. It changes a little bit. So now when you're in high school, what happens is you go to your locker and you're planning for science. But the problem is science is down the hall, up the stairs, and down another hallway. So while you're at your locker, you have to envision, "Oh, okay, we're doing a science experiment. I'll need my goggles. I know I need to turn in my science lab report from yesterday, and I know I need to make sure that I bring my new lab notebook." So even though she's at her locker, she has to hold in her working memory what she's going to look like as soon as she gets up to that room. So the thing about it then is that executive function requires you to be in one space and envision yourself of what you're going to look like down the hall, up the stairs, and down another hallway. You have to be able to hold that in your working memory. There's another transition that occurs too. When our children are young in that sort of first, second, third grade, they often have homework folders. and all the planning is done for them. So that's what they're going to leave at home, and then this is what they're going to bring right back. And typically the teacher will help put those items in, and then when it goes home, the parents will take it out. But look what happens when all of a sudden you hit high school. When you hit high school or even middle school, even upper elementary school, all of a sudden you have an academic agenda book. And the agenda book, we write things down. Now I have a lot of students who come to see me and I say, what do you have for homework? And they go, not much. It's not a bad night at all. And I think, really? Because you have science and you have Spanish and then you have a math and you've got a poster that you have to do. But this goes back to something we talked about earlier, and really think about it. If all I do is look at that and read, I have science, Spanish, math, and a poster, am I using verbal working memory or am I using nonverbal working memory, that sort of mental thought bubble? Well, it's verbal working memory. So it's no wonder kids say not much or I hate homework, because in their mind, there's only 4 things to do. But we know executive function always starts with that really strong nonverbal working memory. So the thing about it is that when a student is at their locker, they have that ability to then, if they have good executive skills, not merely read the word, but they immediately convert the word into nonverbal working memory. They don't read, they have science. In fact, they're at their locker and they think about, okay, what am I going to look like when I get home tonight? Which is going to be, I'm going to be doing homework at 4:30. And they see themselves sort of at home at a different time, even if it's 1 o'clock now. They don't read the word science, they pre-experience it. Oh yeah, I have to answer comprehension questions from the textbook. Spanish, I need to make flashcards from the vocabulary in the workbook. I need to do the front of the math worksheet. I can leave the back for tomorrow. Oh right, and I have to make my poster. The reason why that matters is the distance between where you are in a moment in time. So if I'm a student in the classroom and I'm going to be going to my cubby, which is just right in front of me, as opposed to I'm at my locker and I'm planning for science, which is down the hall, up the stairs, and down another hallway, as opposed to I'm at my locker and I'm planning for homework, which is 2 hours and 2 miles from now. That distance of where you are to how far in the future you can see is called the spatial temporal window. And we have the ability to have to plan over farther and farther distances of space and time. So that's the next key thing that we want to talk about. And one of the things I hear all the time is kids will say, well, I don't really need to use an agenda book. The teacher wrote it all down in Google Classroom. I'll just use that. And they get really frustrated with their mom. I don't have to write it down. But the challenge is that Google Classroom actually represents the teacher's good executive function skills. Even if a student reads that they have that Gatsby essay, they have to convert that word Gatsby essay into an image of, oh, okay, well, what am I going to look like when I do my homework? What time am I going to write the essay? How involved is the essay? Is it 3 pages? Is it 4 pages? What supports do I need? So we need students to be able to still convert what is written on Google Classroom into a visualized plan of what it looks like and when they're going to be able to complete it. So even now, more than ever, when kids have things like remote learning plans or Google Classroom, we must support them in that skill. So the next key concept then is we plan across greater distances of space and time, and that is called the spatial temporal window. So all the time we're stopping and envisioning, what am I going to look like in this room? What am I going to look like down the hall and up the stairs? What am I going to look like an hour from now? What am I going to look like 4 hours from now? How do I see myself tomorrow morning turning in that homework? We're constantly planning farther and farther into the future. And that's a key concept of executive function skills. So we stop and read a room, we see ourselves, we do a dress rehearsal of what that's going to look like, but we do that over farther and farther distances of space and time. So putting that all together, there are lots of models of executive function. I just want to share with you the model that my coworker Kristen and I developed because we find it's really helpful to be the basis of our executive function-based program. So first of all, a lot of times I'll see that this will be written up on the board or Google Classroom, homework, math, measuring your angles, reading chapter 2, etc. But I really, again, want to ask this question. If a student merely takes out their agenda book and they record their homework, are they using verbal or are they using nonverbal working memory? Well, all they're doing is recording words, so it's verbal working memory. And executive function always starts with nonverbal. So we have to support the student in being able to convert that. So good executive function skills, here's the model. It says that when we read assignments, when we read things like on Google Classroom, we stop and we do that skill of what we say, putting on our future glasses. And we imagine the future and we convert it into nonverbal working memory, and we are a mind mime. We do a mental dress rehearsal of that very assignment. So we put on our future glasses and we stop and ask ourselves, what will it look like when I'm done? And I literally imagine, oh, I don't read the word angles worksheet, I picture it. It's a worksheet that has about 10 problems on it. Then what I do is I ask myself, okay, well, what will I need to do to make it look like that? And that's where we do that mental dress rehearsal. We literally envision ourselves actually measuring it and using the protractor. And with that in mind, that guides us to think about, well, then what materials will I need to make sure that I bring home? Oh, okay, I'm going to need my protractor and I'm going to need that cheat sheet on how to use the protractor. The key thing that we teach all the time is that you plan backwards to execute forwards. I'll say it again, we plan backwards to execute forwards. And if you don't like that phrase, we say you plan your work and then you work the plan. So with all of this in mind, there is that temporal spatial window. This girl is in her classroom and she's envisioning what the homework is going to look like when she gets home. But that's really great because then over space and time, as soon as she gets home, having pre-imagined what that homework is going to look like, she then just works her plan. She gathers her materials. She knows what her done goal is. The 10 problems are done. She identifies how much time she has to complete the work, and she knows what done will look like. The reason we love this model of planning backwards to execute forwards and miming the future, what will it look like when I'm done? What do I need to do to make it look like that? What will I need to get ready? Is that it really builds metacognition. Because if you imagine that this is my worksheet and I envision, okay, this worksheet is going to be done at 5:30 because my friend Abby's coming over to ride bikes. Well, if I start working away and all of a sudden at 5:25, I only have one problem done, then my actual doesn't match my plan, which means I have to make a choice. And in other words, it's what allows me to self-monitor. I either have to change the plan, text Abby and tell her to come over, 15 minutes later at 5:45, or I'm going to have to self-regulate and change what I'm doing actually now. Maybe I need to increase my focus. Maybe I need to minimize distractions. Maybe I need to reach out to my mom to get some help. So the thing that we love about this mind mime is that it allows students to develop awareness of planned versus actual, and then to self-regulate or to self-monitor. So executive function then essentially has 3 distinct phases. But one of the things that makes me most crazy is I go into lots of school programs and meet with parents and teachers, and I'm a mom myself, and we'll say, all right, are you working on executive function skills? And they'll say, yes, absolutely. I'll say, tell me what you're doing. But the challenge is they're not teaching the backwards planning and starting with the done in mind. Instead, they're starting with get ready. Get ready for bed, get ready for school, get ready for science, get ready to do that assignment, get ready for recess, get ready to go home. You cannot start executive function with get ready. If you start with get ready, then you're starting with the immediate regulation. You're not giving the student the opportunity to pre-experience and mime, which gives them the foundational ability to have nonverbal working memory and to know whether they're not on track. It starts at task executing, but it bypasses planning. So we have to work on teaching students to first be a mind mime. We never ever want to start task execution with get ready. So as I mentioned, task execution then has 3 distinct phases. Backwards task planning, which allows for forward task executing, which then allows for us to self-monitor. Okay, with all of that in mind, let's move on to a few quick tricks. This is one of sort of 3 presentations that on executive function I'm doing. Today I'm just going to talk about some strategies around routine and transitions. I have a second webinar on all things time management. How do we support kids in seeing and sensing the passage of time? And then a third one on task management. But for the moment, let's just sort of talk about the premise of intervention. I absolutely love this cartoon. Why you need to be a mind mime. So here the student says, bring the project on Wednesday, and he leaves himself a note. Then another note, Bio Project Wednesday. Another note, Bio Project Wednesday. Another note, bring on Wednesday, and there is the bio project. Bio, bio, bio. This is a teenager who eats a lot of food. Super strategy. Go ahead and put that right into the refrigerator. Bring the bio project on Wednesday. And along rolls Wednesday, and he says, thanks, Mom. It slipped my mind. And there's Mom. Oh, if you're a parent, you know just what this is all about. But I love this cartoon for this reason. If I take away this last frame, I could have told you, and now you can too. Oh yeah, there's no way that he's going to be able to remember that project. Why? Because is he using verbal working memory or is he using nonverbal working memory? Well, it's verbal. And remember, we want it to be nonverbal. So the key thing then is we have to teach students to be a mind mime or to mime it. And I love the work of Dr. Russell Barkley. He's sort of really considered to be like the father of executive function research. And he really emphasizes that if we are not going to compensate for kids' executive function skills, and if we're going to teach them to truly neurologically bring about change, the only way we can do that is if we teach students to repeatedly practice stopping, seeing the future, feeling the future, playing with the future, and going towards the future. We must build that mind mime nonverbal working memory skill to neurologically change students' capacity to have strong executive function skills. So to do that, let me go ahead and show you as many practical strategies as possible. Number one, we always want to teach students to do what we say, start with the done. What will it look like when I'm done? And we talk about this idea of putting on your future glasses. And we do love to have future glasses. You can find things like clown glasses like this, putting on your future glasses and imagining, okay, what's it going to look like when I'm done? It can be a fun pair of glasses like these. I like this pair too. They're kind of sparkly and fun. My other favorite piece, I travel a lot and the earpiece is broke, but these are pretty cool future glasses that I can put them on and imagine, okay, what's it going to look like in the future? And I have a brand new pair. This is my absolute favorite. I just got these. How cool are those? So it's always this idea for students to be able to envision. And by the way, don't think you're limited to young kids, because I have a whole basket of future glasses. And I can't tell you, and I mentioned this in one of my other webinars, even my toughest teenagers will come into my office and they'll dig through the basket and they'll be like, all right, I got my future glasses on. Let's do this thing. And they'll just own it. So you can make it as fun as you want it to be. So I really love fun future glasses. So with that in mind, we always want to start with the done. But remember I said we don't want to start with get ready. Well, why not? Okay. Let me give you an example. Let's imagine that here's a girl and her hair is a mess. She's eating breakfast. She's still in her pajamas. And mom comes in and says, honey, stop eating breakfast. We have got to leave for school at 7:30. Quick, go get ready. And the girl goes, I know, one more bite. And she takes another bite. And you say, honey, no, we have got to go. I'm going to be late. You're going to be late. You don't want to miss out on that bus ride. It's so much fun. Quick, go upstairs and brush your hair. Now, here's the problem. That little girl is just saying, I know. The minute mom says, quick, go upstairs and brush your hair, who's the one that did the mental spatial time travel? Mom did, not the girl. The girl's just sitting there eating, saying, okay, one more bite. She's not envisioning herself putting that away into the kitchen sink, going down the hall, up the stairs, and into her bedroom to brush her hair. So the problem is that in this example, if we say get ready and we tell the student what to do, then we're essentially being the student's prosthetic frontal lobe. But here's the other challenge. You could say, honey, go upstairs and get ready. And maybe the child finally goes upstairs, all right? And they put on their pants and t-shirt. And the problem is that that's not what you were picturing. When you said, we're late, we got to go, that's what you were picturing. It means you're dressed. It means you have your pants. It means you have your shirt on. It means you have your backpack, your lunch, and a sweatshirt. So the thing is that the student's image doesn't necessarily match our image of what it's going to look like. Now, one of the other things I hear all the time from parents is they'll say to me, well, don't worry about it. I read a book on executive function skills and they highly recommended go ahead and put a checklist right there on the kitchen counter. Okay. Well, based upon everything I've told you, do you think that's a good idea or do you think that's kind of a bad idea? Actually, it's a bad idea. And I'm sure a few of you are going, what? I love checklists. How can it possibly be a bad idea? Well, here's that question again. Is a checklist verbal, words, or is it picture nonverbal? It's words. And the fact of the matter is that checklists actually come from mental imagination. If you think about it, if you were going to go to the grocery store tonight and all you had to do was buy a rotisserie chicken and a salad, you're probably not going to make a list. Why? Because you can envision going into the store, getting the chicken, getting the salad, and leaving. But if you're going to do a major shop up, you will do a list and you'll probably even organize your list by aisle. You might put all the dairy things together, all the produce, all of the meat together, because you're envisioning shopping in the store and what you see getting, that's what's going to go on your list. But the other thing about checklists that make them not so great is when I lecture to a group of people, I'll always say to people, how many of you like checklists? And it's amazing. Everyone's hand goes up. I love them. And I'll say to someone, okay, you love checklists. Come up here and up with me and talk with me for a minute. And I'll say, all right, tell me what you have going on tonight. And one of the things that they'll do is they'll say, oh, all right, well, let's see. Tonight I have to leave here. I have to pick up my one son from soccer and bring him home. I have to get the other one at hockey and then whip him home. I've got to put dinner on the table and do the laundry. Now notice what I'm doing is I'm gesturing. Gesture is a core aspect of executive function skills. And when we pre-experience our plan, we often are gesturing out our thought of how we're going to carry out that activity. The problem with a checklist is a checklist doesn't develop that sense of gesture. So even if you're a classroom teacher and this is what you normally do, you put this up in Google Classroom or you put this up at the front of the board. Again, it's a verbal list and we want a student to be able to convert that into a nonverbal working memory. If you are working in a resource room and you say to the student, okay, here's all the things that you need to be prepared for your next class. The problem is maybe you're the one that made the checklist or the student writes it down, but they're not pre-experiencing being in that future space and using that future experience to guide their capacity to generate the checklist independently. So when someone tells you their plans and they say to you, okay, well, let's see, I need to leave here. I need to go upstairs. I need to let the dog out. Then I need to go into the laundry room. I've got to quickly put the wash into the dryer and then I should start dinner. When you're doing that and you're gesturing, that is called representational co-thought gesture. And it's different than something we call co-speech gesture. Co-speech gesture is gesture that accompanies your speech or telling a story, or where you're talking about an experience. So if I say, oh, I went fishing and I caught a fish that was about this big, my hands are accompanying my speech. Co-thought is exactly what it is. It's gesture that accompanies your thoughts and planning. It's an outgrowth of your mental spatial time travel. Well, I need to leave here. I need to get to school tomorrow. I've got to go to my locker and then I have to turn in that in science. And we tend to gesture because it gives life to our mental scratch pads. And the most important thing is it sort of frees up our nonverbal working memory. Having pre-experienced it, we can even infuse it with emotion and recognize, oh boy, I don't want to be late to that class because the teacher will take points off. So I better leave here, quickly go to my locker, and then I need to rush upstairs. And you'll see kids will change their gesture to be like rush upstairs to show really quickly. So the idea is that you have to have representational co-thought gesture as a sort of a foundational skill of executive function skills. And we have a lot of students who don't gesture. So this is a big concern. So gesture actually fits right here with the mind mime. If I'm in class and you ask me to pre-experience being prepared for science or for math, I have to envision, okay, well, I'm going to go to my cubby and get my notebook. I'm going to go over to the teacher's desk and get the worksheet, and I'm going to come back to my desk to do the work. It's what allows us to pre-experience and develop that if-then stated intention thinking. So we really need to have a tool that enables us to build gesture, and a checklist doesn't do that. So the checklist starts with verbal working memory. We need something that's going to immediately evoke the nonverbal working memory in our students. How do we do that? So the thing is when you said to this girl, okay, it's time for school, we were out the door at 7:30, you didn't want her to do that. What you wanted her to do was say, okay, well, if it's 7:15 now, that's what I look like at 7:30. And if that's what I look like at 7:30, then watch me for a minute. I need to go upstairs and get dressed. I need to go into my bathroom and brush my hair. I've got to come downstairs and get my lunchbox. You want them to envision, what's my plan to move through space and time to achieve that future goal and that future intention. So one of the first things that we really recommend is when students need to follow routines, whether it's a getting out the door routine, whether it's a exiting the classroom routine, whether it's being prepared for class, that you take a phone, an iPad, whatever it is, and when the student is fully prepared, fully dressed, whatever it is, that you grab your phone and you just say to them, wow, you look great, you're ready for school. Snap, take a picture. Or you might say to the student at their cubby, look at you, you're fully dressed, you have all the things that you need, you're ready to go home. Grab your phone and take a picture of them. Then what we like to do is we'll either keep that picture on the phone, and or sometimes we like to make executive function notebooks. We'll take that photograph and we'll put it inside a plastic sleeve protector in a notebook, so that the next morning I can say to that student, remember yesterday when you went out the door? This is what you look like. But that's not the real magic. The real magic is you want to say to the student, show and tell me your plan to match the picture. And the show is so important because the show evokes the gesture. When I look at that photograph, like the one up here, I can say, oh, okay, I need to go upstairs and brush my hair. I need to go into my bedroom and get dressed. I need to come back downstairs and get my lunchbox. So the show gets them to gesture, and the tell evokes those stated intentions. Now, some of the pushback I get from clinicians and teachers is, well, I work with high school students, that won't work. And I actually disagree, because I work with a lot of high school students, and I will have a photograph and I'm just very factual about it and say, you're working on executive function skills and being organized, and organization starts with mimetic processing, being a mind mime and envisioning what does a done goal or a future goal look like. So let's get a picture. In the future, when you're ready for school, that's what ready for school looks like. You have your technology, you have your books and binders, and you're fully dressed. One of the other pushbacks I will get is, well, what do you do with the kid who says, you mean I have to wear that shirt every single day? No, actually, we can use this to create flexibility. But perhaps some of the biggest pushback I get is where educators will say, we know, multisensory classroom, we already know how important visuals are. And they say, we're using those all the time, and this is what they show me. Well, is this an executive function visual? The answer is no, but it's really critical that you understand why it's not, and why it's not as effective as an actual photograph. And it goes back to the example that I talked with you about semantic and episodic memory and a wedding. So the problem is remember, the semantic system is acontextual and it's not the remembering system, whereas episodic memory is experiencing yourself in a moment in space and time, and it's the remembering system. So the problem is the list on the left is semantic. It's just pictures. It's factually items like having a headband, a shirt, a snack, and a bag that could be required to go to school. But we now know executive function is not semantic. Executive function is about a future episode or mimetic processing. Make an image. What will it look like? What will I look like? How am I moving? How does that feel? The problem with the image of the checklist where it says headband, sweatshirt is it's not a gestalt image. There's no me in that image, and it doesn't evoke the movement. So the thing is that checklists cue semantic recall, but executive function is all about episodic future memory, and that's what we want to trigger. So yes, we recommend that you start your intervention with actual photographs. Thinking in pictures develops students' ability to go from the whole to the features to the details of planning, to break it down. It helps them in being flexible. Well, if it's a cold day, then I would look the same but different. I would have a long sleeve shirt on. If I'm going to be buying lunch today, I would look the same but different. I would have lunch money, not a lunchbox. And it develops that gesture where students can look at that photograph and go, oh, okay, I need to go upstairs. And that helps them do that stated intentions. I need to get my lunchbox. I need to have a coat, etc. So the thing is that if you're a teacher and you normally do this example on the left where you project what's required, I have a different suggestion. Take a photograph of what ready to be a student in a classroom looks like. It doesn't always have to be that specific student with executive function challenges. In this example, you can merely have a photograph of a classroom student and then identify the features of being ready. That's what we call feature blocking. So the features of being ready mean you have a writing tool, you have your paper, your binder, and a calculator or a tech tool. Then at the start of class, you can use your smartboard or a projector or even just print out the picture and put it in front of the classroom. Prepared for math, this is what you look like. And so you can have the students identify, oh, all right, well, for a writing tool for math, I'm going to need my pencil, I'm going to need my spiral, I'll need my black binder for math, and I'll need a calculator, so that the students can constantly envision how they're going to look the same but different. If you introduce something new in your class, all right, now we're going to be working on this English assignment where we're going to be listening to a corresponding audio recording to the book. Students are required to bring in headphones. Add that to the image. Now it's how we're going to look the same but different. I have more teachers that come back and will say, wow, it's a game changer, because students quickly look and then they incorporate, and there's the expectation. A lot of kids, when they see the verbal list, they don't even read it. They just don't pay attention to it. And you're going to have to do a lot of cueing and a lot of redirection and re-instruction. So we highly recommend photographs in the classroom. It could be something like this, where you photograph what taking a rug spot looks like, how everyone is seated behind the red line on the rug, so that you can say and project this. Okay, class, it's time for rug spots. Match the picture. It could be something like, all right, it's time to clean up your desk. This is what a clean desk looks like. Tell me your plan to match the picture, so that I can look at that and backwards plan and sequence the steps to achieve that goal. I worked in a high school with a tech teacher, and he said one of my greatest challenges is that students fail to follow safety procedures. And he said, I'm really struggling with them doing the executive dimensions of that task where they're not prepared, anything that I can do. So what we did is we went ahead and we photographed a student using effective safety procedures, and then we feature blocked. Being safe means that you have ear protection and eye protection. It means that you have a secure base to hold the material that you're doing, that you have a grip on the secure base, and that you have a grip on the power tool. If all of a sudden this changed from a drill to a saw, we just identify for students how it would look the same but different. You don't necessarily have to take a whole nother photograph. But what's happening is you're getting students to recognize, okay, what is it that I'm going to look like, and how can I plan to match that picture? If you are teaching in a science class and you want students to, for example, manage the sink area before they leave the class, one of the most effective things that you can do, photograph that space and identify the features of a clean sink area. So we say to our students, before you leave the classroom, show and tell me your plan to match the picture. And we want the students to do the show. Oh, when we need to rinse off their dirty dishes, notice there's the gesture, dry them and put them in the cabinet, so that they're pre-imagining that plan and they're more effectively able to carry that out. So one of the next big things then that we want to do is see the future. What will I look like? And that's where we use photographs so that students can show and tell you their plan to match the picture. It's another reason why we really love to use even things like executive function notebooks, so that students are constantly having sort of that image. I find that if you put photographs up on the wall, they become ignored a little bit. So if it's in a notebook where they have to kind of look at it and match that picture, that's really helpful. If it's on their phone, they kind of have to swipe and find that photograph to match the picture. It really is a game changer when you're using an actual photograph and not clip art and not sort of just like picture icons. So as a final strategy, I want to talk about improving transitions. And part of improving transitions is helping students to plan backwards to move forwards, using that model of, okay, well, what will it look like when I'm done? What do I need to do to make it look like that? And what will I need to get ready? And I think this is probably such an important statement to remind you of, that 90% of the time, task planning happens in a different space from where you execute the plan. If all of you are in the bathroom and you're brushing your teeth and you're thinking about your day, as you're brushing your teeth, you might imagine yourself in the kitchen packing up a lunch and then going into the mudroom to get a bag. So you pre-imagine it so that the minute you get in the kitchen, you're going right for the lunch. If you're in the shower and you're showering, you're pre-imagining, well, what do I see myself wearing today? And if that's what I see myself wearing today, then I could wear the black dress or the blue dress. Then you get out of the shower, you immediately go to the closet and you grab the black or the blue. You don't stand in front of the closet staring. 90% of the time, we plan in one space what it is that we expect to look like in a future space. So with that in mind, don't start the planning process in the space where the child will be executing. So one of my favorite things is that when a child is given a direction, one of the coolest things we do is something called point out your plan. So imagine that you're in a classroom and this is the classroom and here's the direction. So do you see this blue bin? Let's say that students are doing a math time telling activity. They need to get a clock from the blue bin. Then they need to go ahead and over that way, it's hard, my directions are off with this, to get a worksheet from the teacher's area, and then they need to sit on a rug. What we will do is we will ask the student to point out their plan. You can use something like a foam finger. You can use something like a whiteboard pointer. You could use a finger that's cut out of cardstock. But what we want to do is we want to give them a tool that they're going to put in their hands that allows them to go ahead and point out their plan. Okay, so it would look a little bit like this. The student would have their foam finger and you would say, all right, so what do you need to do to be ready for your math activity? Show me your plan. And you want the student to say, oh, okay, well, I need to go over to the bin and I need to get my clock. Then I need to go over to the teacher's area and I can't fit in. I need to go over to the teacher's zone and I need to get my worksheet and then I need to sit on the rug with a partner. And so the whole idea is that that student is sort of pointing out their plan of where they see themselves going. Now you might say, well, how is this any different than just having the student repeat the direction? Well, if a student just repeats the direction, they're only using verbal working memory. But if we have them point out their plan, I'm going to go there, and then I'm going to go there, and then I'm going to go over there, what happens is they're doing that skill of self-projection. At the end of the finger, essentially, they visualize I'm there, and then I'm there. And so we love to have students point out their plan. If you're wondering, okay, well, I've got multiple students in my classroom, how do I do that? We love to use a technique called freeze, point, and share. And the way freeze, point, and share works is the following. Let's say you've given a direction and you want the students to carry out that direction to be prepared for a task. Tell them to turn to their table mate or turn to their table or their desk partner, freeze, point, and share their plan. And so you want students to turn and say, okay, well, we need to go and get our science notebook. We need to get the materials, and then we need to get the markers, and we have to come back to our desk. And by the way, don't feel that you're limited to doing this in the younger grades. I have middle school and high school teachers who will say, okay, for safety procedures or for lab procedures, before you go to gather materials, turn to your table partner and point out your plan. And you want that student to say, okay, we need to go over and we need to get our microscopes. Then we're going to carry the microscopes back to the desk because we're only carrying microscopes by themselves. Then we're going to go over to the sink and we're going to gather our slides and we'll get the droppers and the liquid that we need to put on the slides. So you want them to point out their plan. And I do a lot of classroom observations, both before I lecture and after I lecture. And a lot of times when I present this in a lecture, I'll go back and observe a classroom and I'll see the teacher say, okay, everybody, freeze, point, and share your plan. And it's so much fun. And the teachers are always amazed by how impactful it is, because all of a sudden you'll see peers say, well, we need to go there, there, and there. And sometimes students will say, well, we're going to go pick that up. Then I need to get the worksheet. Then I need to get my notebook. Then I get to my pencil. And they're kind of have this zigzaggy, inefficient plan. But when they partner with a peer, all of a sudden they're a little more efficient, and they'll say, well, wouldn't it make more sense if we get our notebooks, then all the materials, then the markers, and then we come back to our desk? It really increases the efficiency when students go and gather materials. And sometimes kids with executive function challenges, I see that they often use the entire work period as a transition period, and they take as long as the work period to just gather their materials and get ready. And by the time they're ready, the work period is over. This kind of an activity of pointing out your plan really reduces that. But there's another thing that's very important about it. Remember situational intelligence, that when we enter a room, we tend to read the room from the wide angle to the narrow, and that helps us get organized in space and pre-imagine how are we going to move from point A to point B to point C to carry out that plan. For that reason, one of our biggest recommendations is make sure you organize your classrooms by zones. Have like the math zone, the homework zone, the teaching zone, the science zone. The reason that's important is that we want students to be able to plan what zones they're going to enter. Now, you don't have to take a photograph and draw a box around it. You can even arbitrarily talk about it. But when I am working with students, I will photograph classrooms, print the picture, and then we block the zones of the classroom. Okay, there's the math zone. If you're explaining it as a teacher, you might say, see how here are all of the science speakers and all of the things about science. That's our science zone. Over here are all of our folders. That's our writing zone. In here is where we keep all of our supplies, our markers, and our whiteboards. That's our material zone. So that if a student is planning their task, they might say, well, I'm going to go to the writing zone and get my folder, and to the material zone to get my materials and come back to my desk. It increases the efficiency, which with the student is mental spatial time traveling, how they're going to go from point A to point B. And all of this is great when you're in the space planning how you're going to carry out the task. But what happens when you need to see yourself in a future space? So the example of the girl who is at the locker and she needs to plan, well, what am I going to look like when I go down the hall, up the stairs, and down the hallway to science? So at some point, we need to support a student in being able to envision themselves carrying out a task in a future space. So to do that, we'd use a technique called point out your plan. So I like this as an example. Imagine that typically parents might say, okay, it's time for bed, go upstairs, brush your teeth, get your pajamas, climb in bed, and daddy will come read to you. Or, time for soccer, get upstairs, we're going to go ahead and, change your clothes, put on your soccer uniform, braid your hair, come on downstairs, and you need to grab your soccer bag out of the front hall. Well, if you're the parent and you tell the student that, again, you're assuming the executive dimensions of the task, you're doing the mind miming and the planning. We want the student to be able to do that. So instead, stop the child at the bottom of the stairs and say to them, all right, it's time for bed. When you get upstairs, tell me your plan. Point out your plan. What are you going to do? And you want that child to say, okay, well, I'm going to go up into the bathroom and I'm going to brush my hair. Then I'm going to go into my bedroom and I'm going to get my pajamas on and I'm going to pick out a book and I'm going to climb in bed. You want the child to point out where they're going to go. Time for soccer. All right, I'm going to go upstairs. I'm going to go into the bathroom. I'm going to go to the bathroom, braid my hair. Then I'm going to go into my bedroom and get my short and t-shirt. And then I'm going to come downstairs and get my shin guards and my soccer ball out of the hall closet. Have that student point out their plan. We do the exact same thing in the school setting. So we'll say, instead of saying at a student with our locker, all right, don't forget you have science, make sure you turn in your science folder. Or saying to them, don't forget you need to make sure you bring your Spanish note cards to Spanish class. If you do that, you're assuming the executive dimensions of the task. Instead, stop the student at the locker at the end of the hallway and say, remember, we imagine what we're going to look like in one space before we go to that space. That's how we do task execution. So I know you're in this part of the hallway, but what's your plan to be prepared for the next class? Well, I need to go down the hall to my locker. I need to get my Spanish workbook and note cards. I go up the hall, down about 2 doors, and I need to take out my note cards to get them checked off as being complete. When you do this with students, you significantly increase their ability to remember and carry out turning in materials, managing the tasks that they need to, because you're getting them to envision the space and the time and themselves in a task in a future situation, so that as soon as they get to that future space, that space becomes the when cue, and it becomes the time cue of what they need to do in that moment in time in that future space. Because remember that we want students to be a mind mime, and being a mind mime is that combination of that situational intelligence and that nonverbal working memory. So being a mind mime means they can pre-imagine my plan of action in a future space. So number one goal, executive function has 3 stages. Backwards task planning, which allows you to be that mind mime, then forward task executing. You carry out your plan you imagine, and that's what allows you to compare planned versus actual. I hope you got something new out of this. It's been a lot of fun being with you here today. Just a reminder, there are 2 other presentations on executive function, which I'm doing. One is all about time management, helping students to internally see and sense the passage of time, plan and complete tasks in allotted time frames, including long-term projects and planning for exams. And then we're also going to talk all about task management. How do we help students break down simple and complex and open-ended assignments? Thank you again for joining me. Please don't hesitate to reach out and email me. I like email. Tell me what's working, what's not working, if there are requests for future webinars. And in the interim, I hope you have a wonderful, fun, safe summer holiday. Thanks again for being with me today.